Hey there, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for another great webinar. I'm Tyler Blackwell. I'm a physicist at Radformation. I'm really glad to have you here with us. I've been really looking forward to this particular webinar because the topic of focus today is one that is very meat and potatoes for dosimetrists and physicists. We're talking about that area of the process between having a plan you think is pretty good and having a plan documented and reported. Every department does this a little bit differently and to varying degrees of success. So our presentation today highlights the work of two departments that have mastered this portion of the care path and have seen dramatic improvements in workflow because of it. So welcome to the webinar, Clearly Better Together, ClearCheck plus ClearCalc, where we're going to hear from clinical experts on implementation and success using Radformation's automated plan evaluation and reporting solutions. We're planning on getting started in just a few minutes, but as everyone's trickling in, I want to take a second to brief you on all things Radformation. So first, as always, I'll encourage you to sign up for our Radformation newsletter if you haven't already. You can go to the website, radformation.com, scroll down to the very bottom, and you'll see where you can keep up with Radformation. Just enter your email address and hit that subscribe button. While you're on the website, peruse the product pages or check out the blog, where we have new content posted regularly highlighting product updates, interviews with physicists, industry news, and that kind of thing. In the last month, we've posted a few worth noting, including a BED EQ-D2 calculator, which is really helppful and handy. Another focal spot interview with none other than Bet Blankenship, really great interview with her. So, and an interesting piece, a call to action of sorts on data sharing and radiation oncology. So that one's got some fun, cheesy dragon pictures too, so very worth the read. Radformation.com/blog will take you to where you need to go to check those out. As you're probably aware, we're now hosting a repository of over 275 medical physics community surveys. These are ones from Listserv and Meadows, and if you're curious about anything from laser choice to laser color choice to who contours which OAR in the clinic, you'll find it here. So radformation.com/surveys. Also follow us on social. We're active on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, so join us in the conversation on those platforms. Well, we're here for today's webinar, but I want to alert you to another webinar that's coming up. Join us next week, same day, June 9th, Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern for an EasyFluence workshop on advanced breast planning. We'll have our efficiency expert extraordinaire, Mr. John Richards, and he'll show how EasyFluence can make navigating those challenging clinical cases drastically more simple. From 3 and 4 field breast plans and monoisocentric setups to bolus QOD, we're here for you. And we've applied for MDCB credits for this one as well, so we hope to see you there. And of course, this workshop is being held at the same time as the AMD. So, and of course, we're participating in AMD as usual. If you're part of that meeting, just maybe swing by our virtual booth and say hello. You can sign up for that webinar or any other upcoming webinars by visiting the resources section on radformation.com. You can find other items of interest there as well, some that pertain to ClearCheck, ClearCalc. We have case studies and white papers, helpful videos, etc. Well, now that we're a few minutes past the hour, I want to welcome you again to this Radformation webinar, Clearly Better Together. And before we hear from our speakers, I'll provide just a brief introduction to both ClearCheck and ClearCalc. So ClearCheck was one of the very first products Radformation offered, joining the scene nearly 5 years ago in an attempt to make plan review much simpler. And fast forward to today, ClearCheck now automates a large number of mission critical plan check items, starting with structure checks. It can handle collision checks and dose checks for verifying DVH metrics and physics and treatment prep checks. And finally, ClearCheck provides really comprehensive reports for fantastic documentation. So where does ClearCalc fit in? ClearCalc is an independent secondary calculation software that verifies the TPS calculations. And though it's capable of handling DICOM imports from a number of vendors, it's beautifully integrated into Eclipse via scripting for faster results and documentation. And you know, it offers a 3D calculation and dose statistics for your points. And you know, if the point you export out of Eclipse doesn't pan out, ClearCalc can easily suggest one for you, and it makes it easy with a visual display of point doses and makes it very intuitive. And of course, the results can be conveniently added to the ClearCheck report. So with that brief introduction, I want to launch a quick poll for those that are here, just to give us an idea of who is in the audience. So hopefully you can see the poll now. So who's here? Yeah, what best describes your use of ClearCheck and ClearCalc? Do you just have ClearCheck? Do you use ClearCheck only? Do you just have ClearCalc? Do you have both? Or not quite, you haven't quite dipped your toes in with either? Thanks, I'm still seeing some good votes. Thanks. I'm going to close the voting and I'll share with the audience now what we've got. So interesting mix. So kind of breaking it down into thirds. So about a third of you are current ClearCheck users. A third of you have both, and the others are kind of still mulling it. Oh, thanks so much. So both of these tools, you know, by themselves offer major improvements over the alternatives. As you can see, they are clearly better together. So we do have two outstanding speakers today that will help drive that home. Dosimetrist Mariel Cornell will kick us off with the UCSD experience with published data showing substantial time savings using ClearCheck. And following Mariel is physicist Corey Clift from Novant Health, who will discuss his department's implementation and use of both products. And it's really great to have both viewpoints, the dosimetrist and the physicist roles, for that perspective. Really quick before I hand off the mic, I have a couple quick things. I want to inform you that today the webinar will be recorded and it'll be available within 24 hours after the session concludes if you want that second look. We'll deliver it right to your inbox, and in addition, we'll have it posted to the resources page on the website by the end of the week. If you have a question for either Mariel or Corey, just feel free to drop it in that questions section in the GoToMeeting window. You can submit it at any point during the presentation, and we'll just collect them as they come in and have a Q&A session at the end. So I believe that's it from me. So without further ado, I'll introduce Mariel Cornell. Mariel has worked at UC San Diego for 13 years as a senior dosimetrist and manager for their team of 9 dosimetrists. She loves the dynamic nature of the clinic and the constantly evolving technology that drives us forward. And she's committed to embracing automation and finding ways to successfully implement it in the clinic to improve patient care. So with that, I will hand it over to Mariel. Hopefully you've got that control now.
I have it. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me just get set up here. All right. So thanks, Tyler, for the introduction. I'm really excited to share with you all our experience with ClearCheck and ClearCalc that we've gone through here at UCSD. Oops. Okay. So I work at UCSD's Moore Cancer Center in La Jolla. As you can see, we have several regional centers that are also spread throughout the county. Here in La Jolla, we treat about 140 to 160 external beam patients each day. We have 2 TrueBeams and a Halcyon, and we're currently replacing one of our older Clinacs with an Ethos that should be up and ready in August. We have a pretty large brachytherapy program, and there are about 14 physicians that we work with here in La Jolla. As Tyler mentioned, we've got 9 dosimetrists. We average anywhere from 10 to 16 CT sims daily. It's a pretty fast-paced environment with a lot of complex treatments, retreatments, protocols, pediatrics, and that sort of thing. We do a lot of SRS and SBRT planning, and we have a significant amount of teaching responsibilities that we have to work around as well for MD residents, physics residents, as well as the dosimetry and therapy students that come through the department. Our current clinical environment includes ARIA 16.1. We use Eclipse for treatment planning along with rapid plan models that we've come up with for all of our UCSD patients. We use Radformation's EasyFluence product along with ClearCheck and ClearCalc. And then for our IMRT QA, we're currently using Portal Dosimetry. We use ARIA care paths to design our workflows. Up on the screen is a quick example of what a typical care path might look like here. It allows us to be very organized, and it's easy for us to pull any timing data to analyze any workflow changes that we make if we implement new technologies and that sort of thing. We're so busy that we always want to make sure any changes that we make are having a positive impact on our workflow. A few years ago, we wanted to establish enterprise-wide standards and guidelines. So we created disease teams that are made of physicians, physicists, and dosimetrists from all of the UCSD clinics. And we work together to develop these standard and guidelines for each disease and how we want to manage them. We update these guidelines annually to make sure that they stay clinically relevant. Within the guidelines, there's a separate technical section that the physics and the dosimetrist teams work on closely together to help define any of the critical organs at risk that we want to contour, as well as any target volumes and margins. These are important for us to be able to create our structure set templates. We also go through and create and verify dose constraints for each of the relevant fractionation schemes that doctors would like to treat with. We include any treatment planning recommendations and any corresponding plan templates that we recommend using for those plans. And we also create a lot of ARIA prescription templates. Standardizing all of these prescriptions, nomenclature, and dose constraints across the enterprise was really an essential part of us being able to effectively implement any ClearCheck templates that we wanted to use in the future. While the physics team was setting up ClearCheck for the clinic, the dosimetry team dove into our own project. We wanted to validate the plan documentation process using ClearCheck across various external beam plan types. We created a system to classify the complexity of our treatment plans that would correlate to the amount of time that we worked on a patient plan, but also the amount of time that it would take for us to write that patient's plan up. We also wanted to evaluate all the documentation for billing purposes and see if there are any potential time savings that we could gain from adding ClearCheck to our process. This project was great because it also allowed us to do staff training and get all the dosimetrists up to speed on using the product without having to do that on clinical cases. We identified 40 patients from across these complexity categories and gathered timing data for what our current manual process had been. That would include prescription confirmation, quality assessment of the treatment plans, independent MU verification, e-chart preparation, and plan documentation, which was largely done by way of manual screenshots. We then went back and redid all those patients' charts, this time substituting ClearCheck for the plan documentation portion. At the time of the project, ClearCalc was not actually clinically available yet, so our data doesn't include the efficiency gains that we get from adding that in as well. We looked at a 2-week pay period to determine our typical clinical workloads based on those complexity breakdowns. And at the end of the day, our take-home message was a reduction in about 13 hours that could be saved or redistributed to more important tasks within the clinic without compromising any quality in our plan documentation. All of the reports were also validated for billing purposes as well. Both ClearCheck and ClearCalc were rolled out clinically in La Jolla of September of last year for all of our external beam and brachytherapy secondary MU checks, as well as plan documentations. By the end of the year, all of our disease teams had worked together to put together the ClearCheck constraint and structure set templates, and those had been distributed to all of our UCSD regional centers for implementation as well. So we've started to incorporate constraint checks and structure checks in our process now here in La Jolla. We're still having some ongoing discussions throughout the teams to decide who will sign off on any patients that have constraints that don't meet the standards and guidelines, and whether we want to include those constraints within our plan documentation that doesn't currently include them. The dosimetry team quickly embraced the structure checks for margin confirmations and to verify that none of their contours had stray pixels prior to treatment planning. They use the plan checks for any cases where they're concerned about potential collisions. And they love having the disease team constraint templates for each fractionation regimen to provide an automated review for each of their plans that they're working on. As I mentioned, we also have a lot of rapid plan models that we run. So planners will run the model and do a thorough assessment of those plans to see what improvements can be made. ClearCheck also has a plan comparison report that we use, as you can see here, that allows us to compare our new clinical plan versus our rapid plan and see if there's any improvements to be made, or if we inadvertently, had made one constraint worse through our iterative planning process. I wanted to provide you with some background for our old secondary MU check process. We had a third-party product that required fixed licenses on each computer and separate user IDs. We would use this for all of our photon, electron, brachytherapy, and on-call hand calcs. This required us to do a DICOM import and export of our Eclipse treatment plans and provided a simple 2D hand calculation to compare with our much more elaborate Eclipse 3D calc. These reports were saved to a separate file that we would then manually incorporate into the patient's plan documentation. We had safety concerns where you could accidentally put the wrong patient's QA report into their plan document if you were not being careful. If you exported your plan from Eclipse and the calculation point that you had chosen didn't work for this product, then you would have to go back and change your point and re-export. So it could be a very labor-intensive process. We're now using ClearCalc exclusively for all of our photon, electron, and brachytherapy cases, and we're working with the on-call team to switch those calcs over in the future too. Some of the clear advantages that we're already seeing with ClearCalc is the ease of access of having it be accessible through the floating license within the Eclipse API. Makes it very easy for all of our clinic planners and residents to be able to pull this up. We don't need to maintain a separate user account. These are just accessed through ARIA. We no longer need to do any DICOM importing or exporting of plans, which is a huge time saver as well, especially for patients that have multiple plans, like those fun 5-fill breasts. ClearCalc comes with an automatic optimized calc point selector, so you can do a calc with a point if you have one in mind, but you do not need to worry about creating a point otherwise. ClearCalc's finite size pencil beam algorithm provides a much more accurate 3D calculation that we can compare with our TPS calculation. It's easy to add and modify calc points on the fly if you do want to. We can push these reports directly to a patient's plan documentation, so we don't need to worry about adding that in later. And for those cases where you might have a field that comes close to failing or is failing, it's easy for second checkers to pull up this software and add in some comments there as well. I thought I'd walk you through a quick case for using ClearCalc. As you can see, it's easily accessed through Eclipse scripting, so there's no DICOM export that we need to worry about here. Once you're in ClearCheck, you can click on the calculator icon to open ClearCalc. If you are working on a patient with several plans, they will show you a list here, and as you go through and run ClearCalc for each one, it will become italicized, so it's really helpful, keeps you organized to know what you've already run. ClearCalc uses Radformation's finite size pencil beam calculation algorithm to do a true 3D calculation for each field quickly for a direct comparison with your Eclipse Calc. If you have any reference points defined within your plan, ClearCalc will default to using these first to see if they will pass for all of your treatment fields. If they don't, ClearCalc moves on to the plan isocenter to determine if that's a good location for calc point. If neither of these are a good option, there is an automated internal calc point algorithm that looks for any points that are 3 millimeters from any tissue transitions, greater than 1 cm from a field edge, and within 90% of prescription for all of your treatment fields. If one point does not provide this solution for all of your fields, ClearCalc will use the least number of calc points needed in order to provide an analysis for you. It doesn't happen often for us clinically, but if you ran into a case where you wanted to manually pick your own points for the plan or for each individual field, ClearCalc makes it really simple. You can go into this portion of the screen and there's a nice color-coded legend, and you can see over here actually where your points are located to determine which ones would be ideal for your calculation check. Once you're satisfied with your ClearCalc MU check, you can click on this icon to send the report and the results directly to your plan documentation. For us, we were able to configure one standard plan report template for all 3D and IMRT plans. We created a custom report to provide plan sums for patients with previous radiation treatment. It's super easy to add any additional PDFs or screenshots that you think might be helpful to each patient's document on the fly. We've already seen a reduction in plan documentation errors, and the standardized process has helped immensely for the billing team to know what to expect and where to find it within the plan reports. Portal dosimetry report was a feature that was added after our initial implementation, and this has been a great time saver for us as well. So you can run your portal dosimetry analysis and then go ahead and just push that over in the same fashion that you did for your ClearCalc QA. We use things like cover page notes up here to help the billing team know exactly what it is that this document includes. And as you go through, you can kind of see all of the different requirements satisfy our billing needs. ClearCheck has been a great addition to our disease team weekly chart rounds as well. It's helped to standardize each patient's plan review and helps to quickly highlight any patients that might not be meeting our constraints to facilitate the conversations if we might need to change targets or if there's any replans to be made for those particular patients. It's also been incredibly helpful to have the templates built for all of the different prescription regimens. And so we don't have to remember all of those constraints on the fly and be able to tell the physician that every constraint has been met for a patient. Overall, the feedback from the clinic, from the dosimetrist, the physicist to the physicians, has been incredibly positive for both ClearCheck and ClearCalc. You can see some of the quotes from our colleagues here at UCSD, but it really does reduce the mental fatigue when you are either planning a complex case and you don't want to have to manually check every constraint. It helps our physics checkers when they're checking plans to feel confident that a patient's plan is meeting all of our constraints and allows them to focus in on other safety aspects of a plan. There's no question for us that it's been a welcome game changer to the clinic, and we are excited for using it every single day. All right. And we'll pass it back over to you, Tyler.
Yeah, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Mariel. I will hand it over to Corey. And I'll introduce Corey as well. Corey's a medical physicist with Novant Health UVA Health System Cancer Center, just outside of Washington, D.C. In the rad-onc world, Corey finds interest in risk-based quality management, incident learning, automation, and data-driven decisions. So Corey, looks like you're all set up. I can see everything. So yeah, you've got the controls, and I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Tyler. Hello, everyone. My name is Corey Clift. I'm a physicist with Novant Health UVA Health System outside of Washington, D.C. Today, I'm going to share my experience with both ClearCheck and ClearCalc, and more importantly, speak a bit about how the two together are more than the sum of their parts. ClearCheck and ClearCalc are two products that are very good at doing what they are designed to do. The real unlock here is how they can work together to help planners and physicists do better work in less time. Brief overview of how this talk is constructed. I'll start by giving a better idea of the clinical lens through which I see these products. I'll tell you the story of our ClearCheck transition. I'll tell you how we run ClearCheck and share a couple very specific examples of what I think about when optimizing use of the product. I'll tell you the story of our ClearCalc transition and show you how we run the product. And finally, I'll show you why ClearCheck and ClearCalc are so good together. And let me also mention that I'm not being compensated in any way for this talk. And I hope that I'll give you the impression this is my honest opinion on these products. Here at Novant Health UVA Health System Cancer Center, we have a variant-centric perspective. We have two variant accelerators, and we're using Eclipse 15.6. We were early to adopt ClearCheck back in July 2017. At that time, ClearCheck was incredibly useful already, but it didn't have nearly the scope that it does now. We had been using a factor-based secondary calculation software for several years, up until quite recently. In May 2020, we transitioned to ClearCalc and really never looked back. I'll try to give you some idea of what the transition was like and how we benefited from the move. So simply put, our ClearCheck story can be summed up as so much time saved and so many errors caught. Before ClearCheck, like many of you probably, we use spreadsheets to analyze our DVH metrics and to calculate our dose distribution quality metrics. Here is an example for SBRT lung. Everywhere you see a gray box is a manual entry. So obviously this is prone to error. And if we think about this process from a risk assessment point of view, the probability of an erroneous entry is high. And what's perhaps more important is that the detectability of that failure mode is low. You can imagine that the only way to really get your arms around detecting this likely failure mode is to have a second person review each of these entries. If this sounds like a mismanagement of valuable human resources, then trust your instincts. Once we transition this process to ClearCheck, the deviation dose distribution metrics are populated and assessed automatically, so the probability of an incorrect number populating here is very nearly zero. The detectability of this failure mode is still low. However, if you think about the risk priority number, which combines the two ideas, it's obvious that ClearCheck greatly reduces risk in the clinic just by automating this process. Plan checks. We started with just a few. In fact, we had ClearCheck before there were any plan checks. One of the greatest things about this product is the continuing development. And our story with this product is one of welcoming the new checks with each upgrade and trying to carefully analyze and understand each one and designing templates that deploy them optimally. And when it comes to managing risk in the clinic, ClearCheck increases the detectability of all sorts of failure modes that live in your planning process. The results it produces can start fueling your incident learning system and give you more complete information on how to make your process better in the first place. When we're running ClearCheck, everything starts with the planner entering the template. During this process, you have the option to have a particular structure check template, plan check template, and treat prep check template come along for the ride. If you are an admin for ClearCheck, you will have to think very carefully about exactly which templates to pair together. In some situations, like the one I'm showing here, the treat prep check, you might not want to populate that template at all. This comes down to fine-tuning the sensitivity and specificity of your specific operation, your tolerance for alarm fatigue, and the sophistication of your users. Once the plan is complete, we can communicate the DVH information to the provider when they review the plan. Sometimes the provider's preference is to run ClearCheck from their own contouring workstation, and sometimes their preference is a screen capture. Once we select our plan report, default in this case, we can send the report to the patient's documents with a single click using ARIA Document Services. And this one-click printing has saved us an incredible amount of busy work. When the plan comes to me for review, ClearCheck is my first stop. I don't look at the dose or the contours or anything really until I see ClearCheck first. And in ClearCheck, I can get a head start on checking the things prone to an automated check, so I can save my time for things that must be done by a human. Does the plan make sense? Is the prescription typical for this sort of case? Is the immobilization appropriate for this scenario? Once I'm happy with the plan, we use ClearCheck to print a single page summary sheet for the therapist. We just pick the report template from the list. This is the only piece of paper we generate during planning. This has the relevant plan and field properties, as well as the shifts between the reference setup position and the isocenter location. And in the case of IMRT or VMAT, we also use ClearCheck to generate a document, the summary of the findings of the EPID-QA. We have another report template here in the list that only includes the EPID-QA, and like the plan report, we can send this to ARIA with a single click. The time savings for this process has really added up and has made IMRT QA just a little less painful for us. I like to think about ClearCheck as a diagnostic test. And one way to make sense of a diagnostic test is to consider its sensitivity and specificity. When we increase the sensitivity of a test, we're trying to reduce the frequency with which we arrive at a false negative. For the plan checks available in ClearCheck, the most obvious approach is to simply turn every check on. However, if you're striving for perfection, it can be a bit more complicated. Here's an example. This is a picture of a test plan in which I've taken these tangential breast fields and I've offset the isocenter of the medial field and the lateral fields just a bit in the Z direction. For this case, we have the same ISO check turned on. And as it turns out, this check is essentially perfectly sensitive to this failure mode. Now consider this 3-field scenario. Here, I haven't made the error with the 2 tangent fields. They have the same isocenter location. But what I goofed here is I offset the superclad field by a small amount in the Z direction. Now in our workflow, tangents and the superclav live in separate plans. What's interesting here is that the same ISO check is not particularly sensitive to this failure mode. And in fact, the result is a false positive. What's happening here? This particular check is operating on the plan level, not the course level, and not the plan sum level. And I bring this example up because I wanted to illustrate that you need to understand how each of these checks executes to use it optimally. This check is not broken by any means. It just operates in a specific way that might see some failure modes well and see others consequently poorly. However, RadFormation reacts when I give them feedback like this, and you can bet the functionality of this check will soon be expanded to handle more scenarios and give me more choice with respect to this test. The second important idea is specificity. One way to think about increasing specificity is to reduce the number of false positives. If an automated check throws false positives, the operator may start to ignore the check altogether, which undermines the utility of the check. This concept has a name, alarm fatigue, and this is an automated check's kryptonite. Here's an example to illustrate what I'm trying to talk about. In our breast workflow, we use 2 BBs at the level of the ISIS center. We put our user origin at the location of these BBs. So a human checker in our clinic, when assessing the BBs and user origin, would score this as a negative. And in this case, they'd be right. And we'd tally this as a true negative. In ClearCheck, one of the more impressive plan checks is the BB check. The check looks at the body contour and can find BBs for you and let you know if they coincide with the user origin. It's an incredibly useful and reliable test when you use it correctly. However, in this scenario, we get a false positive, fuel for alarm fatigue. It should be pretty clear what's going on here. The check is working. It's working very well, doing what it's designed to do. It didn't find 3 BBs, it found 2, so it throws a failure. If I let this go, my planners are going to see a failing plan check for every single breast plan they do, even though they didn't make a mistake. So signing off on this with a verify OK button may just contribute to the fatigue even more. So every person that manages these templates has to consider issues like this and how to handle them to minimize risk in their own workflow. For us, the right thing to do was just to turn off this check in a breast-specific plan check template. And once this is created, you need to then assign it to all the breast constraint templates you're using. But once again, what's great is that we know in a future release, this check is going to be more sophisticated. And when I have the option to call 2 or 3 BBs a negative, I can just go back into this template, turn the check on, and start running the check on all the breast plans. Our story with ClearCalc really begins with our factor-based second check. We were using a fairly popular piece of software that essentially did a fancy hand calc. If the primary treatment plan is relatively unsophisticated, a factor-based secondary calculation is not a bad way to go. Meaning if you see a large disagreement between the primary MUs and the secondary MUs, it raises a credible suspicion that something might be wrong. However, as the primary plan gets more and more sophisticated, complex patient geometry, VMAT delivery, a Monte Carlo calculation, your grip on sensitivity and specificity starts to weaken and eventually releases altogether. In many cases, running a factor-based secondary calculation will likely leave you with a large difference in MUs. However, you may never really be sure why. Is it because an average SSD is used for the entire arc? Is it because the flash is not accounted for? Have you chosen a bad point, whatever that means? Is there some lateral disequilibrium not being modeled? And more generally, are you seeing the manifestation of some error in your primary calculation, or is your factor-based secondary calculation just not up to the task of correctly calculating the dose per MU at the location you'd specified? This is the problem that ClearCalc solves for me, and it does it seamlessly without needing to export anything out of the TPS. Our story with ClearCalc is one of saving time and eliminating false positives. Starting out, it was a bit less seamless. We were using Eclipse version 11, and when we first got ClearCalc, we had to run the program as a standalone application. To us, this was not really a problem. The primary issue was already laid to rest. The pencil beam algorithm used in ClearCalc is similar enough to our primary calculation algorithm that we weren't inundated with false positives that are merely a result of the discrepancy in the sophistication between our primary and secondary algorithms. To validate ClearCalc, we piggybacked it on our process to validate Accuros. At the same time we were adopting ClearCalc, we were also switching from AAA to Accuros for some sites. So following most of the recommendations in PPG 5, we set up a few different phantoms for a few different geometries with an ion chamber at a few different locations and compared our measured dose AAA dose, the Accuros dose, and the ClearCalc dose. We also ran ClearCalc on all our IROC phantoms that we had measured dose for. Since adoption, we upgraded to Eclipse version 15. And the biggest improvement in functionality so far has simply been being able to run ClearCalc from ClearCheck. And I can show you what that looks like in a moment. Within the app, I think the most significant improvement so far has been the point selection. Now the sampled area is more or less spot on with the locations you probably care about. So here we are in the application, and this is the first page the planner or physicist will see. And many times this is all you really need to see. However, one option here, which we haven't really adopted yet, is to see the statistics associated with a group of points chosen in your target volume. The other option here is to view or edit the calculation points, which takes you to this page. Here we see the dose in 3D. If you don't like the point that was chosen, this is the workspace, which you can choose a different one. Once we got comfortable with the application, we started to spend less and less time in this workspace. And the beauty of ClearCalc is its simplicity and reliability. So there really is not too much to show by way of how to deploy this on the planner's end for the routine work. But what I do want to share with you is how we run ClearCalc and manage its settings. Here we are in the administration side of the application. This is a good time to discuss independence. We want our secondary calculation to be independent of our primary calculation. And this independence can manifest in a few different ways. Each physicist should carefully consider the failure modes they care about and understand how the components the primary and secondary systems share or do not share make the system sensitive to and specific for those failure modes. For example, assume that the failure mode you're concerned about is one in which for a particular patient in a particular calculation job, an error occurs and the monitor units are calculated incorrectly in the primary TPS. Then your secondary calculation does not need separate data or a separate model, and it may not even need to be a separate algorithm. It may just need to be a different calculation job on a different piece of hardware to be sensitive to this failure mode. However, if you are more concerned with some systematic error in the acquired data used for the TPS model, you would need a secondary calculation with entirely separate components, all the way down to a separate data set, resulting in a separate model acquired by another physicist, maybe on a different day. So every physicist must carefully consider their unique scenario and risk assessment and even taste to determine where they fall between these two extremes. In our setup, the calculation algorithm is independent, clearly. The beam data, however, is not completely independent. We operate with the assumption that during the summer of 2020, the measured beam data we had in the TPS was good. However, we are not making this assumption about the measured beam data or the model in the TPS today or tomorrow. When we configured ClearCalc, we synced the data and configured the ClearCalc model just once. And since then, the ClearCalc model is independent of the Eclipse model. So if the Eclipse model changes, ClearCalc should be able to display the difference and vice versa. It's also worth noting here that the DLG and transmission for your MLC is independent of the values in the TPS. So if these MLC parameters happen to change in the TPS, they won't change in ClearCalc. And finally, better together. Why are these products better together? First, they're great on their own. Back in version 11, even when we ran ClearCalc as a standalone, it was still a dramatic improvement on our status quo. But the real unlock is having these products live together. Let's say the plan is approved by the physician and it's ready for ClearCalc. Most of the time, once you're in ClearCheck, you click the calculator icon at the top to run ClearCalc. It takes about 5 seconds for us. You save it, you send the report to ClearCheck with a single click, and then you close ClearCalc. If we check out our report settings on the admin side of ClearCheck, if your report template has this box checked, then your report will include the results from ClearCalc, and they look like this. We one-click print our entire ClearCheck report, which includes our ClearCalc report, straight to the patient's documents in ARIA, and that's it. How much time does this save us? If we consider a single planner doing about 250 cases per year, And we figure we save something like 10 to 30 minutes per patient on the secondary calculations alone. This adds up to something like 1 to 3 weeks per year of planning time per planner. Doing this back of the envelope for ClearCheck is a bit harder, but we figure it saves us at least as much time. That adds up to a savings of about 2 weeks to 2 months per year for each planner over the status quo we operated back in, say, 2016. So we've reached the end of the talk. I hope I was able to give you a real and honest look at these products through our lens, and I hope I gave you some things to think about. These are the sorts of things I think about when I'm deploying ClearCheck and ClearCalc in the clinic. So thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks, Corey. That was a fantastic presentation. I love how you tied the two there together at the end. Yeah, fantastic. And it was good to see how both of you used ClearCheck a little bit differently, and you know, how even though you were kind of giving your presentations today on the same two products, how you kind of came at it from different angles and had two different experiences. So I think it's great to have, yeah, both of those perspectives. I have another poll question for if everyone can do it. So this is for the folks that have, if you do have ClearCheck and or ClearCalc. So if you have either ClearCheck or ClearCalc in your department, how often do you use at least one of them? I mean, obviously we just heard from two super users that are doing this every single day, and you could tell they're crushing it. But I'm just kind of curious to see, you know, if you're maybe using them for just one single thing, or so I'd like to get that feedback. And then if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the questions section during this poll. And we've got both Marielle and Corey available for questions, and also our support expert, Elizabeth Van Wy, here with us. So if you have a question, drop it there and we'll get to them right after the poll. So, okay, I'll close the poll and share with you the responses. So this is exciting. It's good to know. Yeah. So if you've got either ClearCheck or ClearCalc, you're probably in that 67%. You're most people are using it for all patient plans. So that's really great. Good to know. So I will take back, and hopefully you can see my screen. Maybe not. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I'll dive into some questions if there are any. Okay, the first question is, thank you, Corey, for the great presentation. So the question here regards the validating the MUs calc'd by the finite size pencil beam algorithm. Do you think that the MU report from the independent calc method should include some sort of parameters used in the calculation? For example, effective path length, et cetera. I think the documentation, so it's a long question. I think the documentation should show maybe more of the work that was done. Maybe you could provide some perspective there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing is probably if your request makes sense and you ask the right people at Radformation, they can make almost anything happen. But I don't know, my perspective is, you know, do you want your secondary calculation to show you these numbers? Is it important to you? Does it help mitigate risk in your primary calculation? I think that's what I would have to think about. If the failure mode I was concerned about was the primary system not calculating the equivalent path length correctly, then maybe I would want to see it in my secondary calculation. But generally, I'm not specifically concerned about that issue. So it's something I don't even really think about that often.
Yeah, and you know, I think we're probably used to you know, to seeing those things, right? We're used to seeing in our previous secondary calculation algorithms and checks, we're used to seeing them, and so I tend to agree with you, Corey, that if it's necessary for the The interpretation of the results, that's certainly one thing, but maybe it's no longer needed. Okay, so a question. So for either speaker, have either of you used ClearCalc for single isocenter, multiple target plans?
I can speak to that. We have HyperArc here, and so we do a lot of those plans, and we run it on all of those plans and haven't really had any issues.
Yeah, we run it for those sorts of cases, and I was actually going to show an example of that, but I decided not to. But really, for a lot of the older factor-based calculations, that situation was totally hopeless. You know, that would give you it would tell you something is wrong with the plan, and that is squarely within the situation of you know that there's nothing wrong with the plan. It's that your secondary check is just not sophisticated enough to handle it. So yeah, ClearCalc has done a great job with those cases so far.
Mm-hmm. It's good to hear that. Does ClearCalc use the same beam data as the treatment planning system to determine the MU, or does it have its own beam data?
I mean, in many ways, it's sort of your choice. You know, once you've fine-tuned the model inside of ClearCalc, the beam data is not really part of the equation anymore. You know, when it's doing this calculation, it's not like it's pulling beam data to do the calculation the same way that like a hand calc would do. So like I said in the talk, you know, we tuned the model with our measured beam data that also we had in Eclipse. So presumably, you know, you could configure this with different beam data if you wanted. You know, let's say maybe you had a measured data set for one system, and then the you know, something like the representative data for the other system. You could do something like that. That's not what we did. But yeah, there's a few different options for configuring this model. So, and again, you just have to think about, you know, what are the things, where is the risk in this process that I'm trying to minimize? And if you think it has something to do with measured beam data, then maybe you do want to have two different measured sets to configure the models.
Yeah, and this is Liz. I can also follow up with that as well. You know, with ClearCalc, it does come pre-packaged with our own beam data. And as Corey mentioned, you know, we then sync with your beam data that's stored in Eclipse. And so we apply some correction factors to our beam data so that it automatically fits. And so it makes to get up and running very quick. Then from there, as Corey mentioned, if you did want to customize any of that data or use your own data and not use our corrected data, we can work with you to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for chipping in that piece there, Liz. So Mariel, I have a question for you. So you mentioned that, you know, you don't often see any major differences in your secondary calcs now with ClearCalc, but do you mind detailing real briefly what you do have to do if you do find some sort of you know, difference, and maybe what's your threshold that you use?
Yeah, so like I said, we don't run into it too often. I think really the times that we kind of need to stop and take a pause are for some of our brain met cases where the field size is really small, and that's kind of been expected. We've developed a process here at UCSD. The dosimetrists run all of the ClearCalc results, and if we have any problems or something's not passing, at that point we'd pull in the physics second checker so that we could both be working on it and develop, you know, whatever solution we think is appropriate. Some of the other cases that might struggle a little bit would be some of the electron cases, and so we have developed a way to, you know, pick our own calculation points to make sure that our MUs are within our typical range that we're expecting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Liz, maybe this is a question for you. How does ClearCalc handle electron cutout factors?
Sure. So ClearCalc, just like how it comes prepackaged with photon data, it also comes with electron data that's found on the MedPhys files. And so this includes cutout factors. We also have the ability to automatically calculate what that cutout factor would be for you using sector integration. If you find you have your own measured cutout factors, you can also enter those in the software.
Great. Yep. Sounds like it's well handled there. And then one question came up about, assuming you've got these hard stops, right? We've got automation to kind of provide a little bit more detail for errors that may be occurring. So let's pretend that we maybe are catching these errors sooner. How are both of you or either of you dealing with these errors? How are you trending them? Do you use ClearCheck in any way to help trend with these, or do you have an outside incident learning system? And how do you make sense of that data?
Yes, I mean, we used Royals, and I guess one thing that we try to do is when ClearCheck finds something and we report it, we try to include the word ClearCheck in the narrative, so that when we run analytics on all the narratives that we collected in Royals, then we can like immediately see the ones that ClearCheck caught. But it's interesting because it's catching a lot of things that would have been caught during a physics plan check, and it's sort of pushing them up, earlier in the process. So it's sort of originally it was kind of the role of the physicist to report things, but as ClearCheck starts to push things higher up into the earlier in the process, it's like falling on the dosimetrist to report these things in Royals. So yeah, that's our experience.
We have our, we use Royals as well, but we also have our internal incident reporting system, and we've been using that for several years. So we have a lot of data on kind of some of these errors that would pop up in, like Corey was saying, in the physics second check. And so those have significantly decreased, at least from the physicists finding those at this time of second check. And so the dosimetrists are still getting a little bit comfortable with the system and trying to be methodical about, making sure that they're looking at the structure checks prior to optimizing a treatment plan and that sort of thing. So just kind of working together to come up with the workflows that allow you to embrace what all of these products help bring to the clinic. And then our physicists are also really trying to see how these products can help streamline the overall planning process and make second checks at the end a lot more streamlined if you're feeling confident that these things are getting checked methodically throughout the whole planning process.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and hopefully with ClearCheck and ClearCalc, you are able to prevent these errors from propagating. So thanks to both of you for that. I have kind of like a selfish question, because I think that, Corey, what you have done with the templates for reporting in ClearCheck was really incredible, and I like the idea of providing the therapists a real brief summary document for their plan review. And I'm just kind of curious what types of things you include in that summary.
So at the very top, that's where the plan properties live, and we tried to really pare it down to sort of just what they need to know, and in particular, like what's in the prescription. So because we want them to look at that electronic prescription and compare that with the top of that report. And so we don't want any fluff there. We don't need any extra stuff that they need to pick through. And then on the bottom half of the page, where we have the field properties, we really tried to only show them the things that the machine interface is going to show you, and try to put them in that order too. So on the first day when they're moding up each field, they can run down through that printed list really quickly and not have to, if they're checking the MUs last, we want that to be last listed. And, if they're checking X1, X2, Y1, Y2, we try to order it that way. So it's really just trying to make it as easy as possible for the therapist to check just the things they need and not show them anything else.
Well, that's great. You've got everything ordered, so it's very process oriented. Yeah, very helpful, I'm sure, for them. Well, that looks like all the questions we have for now. So Marielle, Corey, thank you so much for the time you put in to the presentations. It's clear you guys are using ClearCheck and ClearCalc at the very highest level, and I think it's great to have you and your clinical perspectives here to share with everyone else. So so I appreciate that, and thank you to everyone that joined. We look forward to seeing you at upcoming webinars, including Easy Fluence workshop next week, and again, visit us at AMD and the other meetings that are coming up. Till then, take care, and thanks again for everyone's time. See you guys.